So I thought I would just take a few minutes and kind of walk everybody through the books I have published over the years and perhaps share a little bit about them and when they came and how they came up. This first video is just a brief overview, and my intention is to provide a few videos later, maybe reading an excerpt from each book, describing a few more personal anecdotes around why I wrote the book, when I wrote the book, what was happening in my life when I wrote it. I think these are all very important to understanding my soul journey in writing these books, because all of them are deeply embedded in what was going on in my life at the time. So, the first book that I ever published and completed was a novel. This was not the first novel I wrote. I've written a few others prior to this one, Earth Maiden, but I never published them. I never finished them. So this was my first completed novel, was Earth Maiden in 2007. It took me many years to reach the point where I could actually complete it. It's a fictional story. It's kind of fictional fantasy, and it's a couple hundred pages, and it's an adventure, essentially. It takes off a little bit. As I said, it took me many years to write. It began even before I met my husband in 1999. So that gives you an idea of how long it took this first one for me to complete it. I was also at the time, of course, working a full-time job. So that impacts it as well. But this is a deeply personal novel, and I hope to share more about it with you later. The second book that I ever published was in 2008, and it's called Rainbow Bubbles and Whirling Lights. The characters in it are, this is based on one of my cats, Kipra, and this is based upon our corgi, Puka. This I wrote as I was studying yoga and Ayurveda. I had someone do the illustrations for me because I cannot draw to save my life. But this was just a really fun book to create, and I actually wrote it with the intention of giving it in dedication to my nieces, because I couldn't find something similar in stores. So that's why I wrote that one. The book I wrote, or I should say published, a couple years later in 2010, was specifically dedicated to my mom. Gypsy Feathers is a compilation of my poetry. And my mom has been my biggest fan. She was my biggest fan. She passed 2 years ago. She was my biggest fan as far as poetry. Each Christmas, I would write at her request a poem to be sent out with Christmas cards that detailed the family life for the year. So she was a huge fan of my poetry. I don't share a lot of my poetry with other people, and so this book was published only for her. And it contains a selection of love and romance, animals and nature, heart and soul. So this is, or was, for my mom in 2010. In 2011, I took a journey through my soul inquiry. The intention behind this book was contemplative writing. I used Deborah Koff Chapin's soul cards as my jumping off point. Very intuitively, I would have sacred space each morning, and I would draw a card, and then I would write into the vision of the card and what was coming through me. So this is 120 passages inspired by those cards and what was going on in my life in that moment over those months. This was sequential. I did not skip a day. It was 4 months of intense soul searching. So that one I published in 2011. During that time, we were also preparing to move from Maine to Tucson, Arizona, and that influenced some of that. The follow-up book in 2012, one could say it's part 2, is Reflections of a Journey on the Gaia Path. This I wrote and compiled during that chaotic, tumultuous first year moving from Maine to Tucson. So some of these are very powerful, very intense, and that's how that arose. Also, during the time we lived in Arizona, I wrote Desert Fire, but prior to that I wrote Minoan Messages. Minoan Messages was published in 2013. In 2012, I had an emotional breakdown. I was a mess, and my husband agreed that I needed whatever I needed, and at that time, I had been longing for 15 years to make a pilgrimage to Crete. This book is about that pilgrimage to Crete. It's a deeply personal book. It's a memoir. That's what this one is about. I hope to share more about that later with you. When I returned, I went through the publishing process for myself, compiling this memoir, trying to understand how to make it interesting to others, but also be honest and truthful of what I was going through. After it was published, I received a lot of criticism about the writing style, the way I published it. The editor was very negative about it. I, again, withdrew. I figured, what am I supposed to do with all of this negativity? I went to college for a year. I took creative writing courses. This book, Desert Fire, the subtitle is actually Befriending the Monster in My Mind. It gives you a little idea of, it was my struggle to understand my writing, how important it was to me. Did other people's opinions matter? Struggling with living in a desert. It's, again, profoundly moving for me. And I wanted to share that journey with other people. So Desert Fire was then published in 2015. I published it immediately prior to our move back to the land of my birth, which is Southwest Missouri. That in itself has been another tremendous journey. During that time, reconnected. We moved up here so that I could help take care of my aging mother. One of her passions was family history. Together, we embarked on creating a family history book. I got on Ancestors.com, various other genealogy sites. I learned to use the software Roots Magic. I compiled an entire volume dedicated to my family, paternal and maternal sides. And this surprised me. This was a tremendous joy. It did bring me closer to my mom, and it was quite an experience. So this was published then in 2018. I was not completely outside of my fiction writing. So during all of those times, Pie in the Sky evolved. I had started Pie in the Sky which is a Chantilly Lace novel. It's part of a trilogy. It takes place in a little town high in the Colorado Rocky Mountains, and it's a girl's journey. A lot of it, I'll admit, is semi-autobiographical, including some experiences, not the physical experiences, but the emotional, mental experiences I had when I was living in Colorado for the second time, which was 94 to 96. And this is a really powerful novel for me. Actually, again, as I said, all my work is deeply seated within my emotional, mental realm and the experiences going on in my life. My novels are not physically about me, not like my memoir, but the novels can't help but be a part of my spirit, of my soul, of the journey I was going through. So this was the first in the trilogy, and it was published also in 2018, the same year I published my family history book. Pie in the Sky, I knew it was going to be a trilogy from the get-go. The second volume, An Extraordinary Legacy, was published in 2021. And I love this book. I had so much fun creating the second book in the trilogy. This was amazing. I drew upon women of all ages, the community they lived in and built high in the Rocky Mountains. It includes excerpts about Hildegard of Bingen, the saint. It includes excerpts of history. I love this book. I think it's just such a fun, deeply moving book. But again, I wrote it, so of course I would enjoy it. So that's a little bit about that one. The third book in the trilogy that topped it out is Exhaling Metaphor. It was published in 2022, and it also, as part of the trilogy, takes place in that little mountain town called Chantilly Lace, high in the Rocky Mountains. But it's a little darker. It really taps into some shadow work, and I consider it a very emotional and deep diving book for me to write. Probably because of that, at the same time I was writing that, I wrote this little mystery novel called Mystery at Aspenglow Chateau, which is extremely lighthearted. It is about 7 siblings who inherit a mansion. It looks like a chateau in the Rocky Mountains, and they go there to find out what happened to their aunt and uncle, who suddenly disappeared. So that was also published in 2022. That gives you a pretty good overview of my thought processes. I'm always writing something, actually more than one book at a time. I'm currently working on another follow-up to this. This is a novella. This is thin. So I'm working on a second novella to take place with 2 of the siblings that also takes place at the chateau and some of their adventures. At the same time, I'm starting a new series. This was my tribute to Colorado, which I dearly love, the Rocky Mountains. They are part of my soul. I've been going there ever since my parents took us there as kids when I was 3 years old. I'm now 63. 60 years, if not living in Colorado, I have been taking vacations in Colorado. So it's a very special place. The book I am working on now is arising out of the family history work I did of the Southern Missouri Ozarks and the Northern Arkansas Ozarks. And it's sort of a Gothic themed novel something I haven't done before. So that one's also what I'm working on. In addition, I'm working on 2 memoirs, sort of half-heartedly. So anyway, that is where my mind goes. That is why I do not post a lot of YouTube videos. I am not a YouTuber, clearly. Everything I do is very amateur, but I'm passionate about writing. I'm passionate about reading. I'm passionate about language and how we can share our stories. And for me, I write them. So I hope this has been at least a little bit interesting to you as we head into the new year. And I do hope to share, possibly read some excerpts from each of these publications to inspire you to share your own stories however they emerge. I don't have children. I have fur kids, my dogs and cats, but I don't have human children. And this is also another way for me to share my stories with my nieces and nephews. As they get older, I hope they will someday want to find out a little bit more about their crazy, strange old aunt. Anyway, like I said, I hope this has been interesting, and I will see you later. Blessings.